Welcome to Arise America. I'm Sheila Mcvicar. A 4-page declassified document creates a firestorm in Washington. The Nunes memo charging that the Federal Bureau of Investigation acted in bad faith to carry out surveillance of a Trump campaign operative. It's a day without precedent for American law enforcement, national security, and presidential politics. Joining us for a quick question before we explain more about what that document shows, Arise News chief political correspondent Eric Ham. Eric, I want to get to the political question here. What does this mean for relations between the Trump White House, the FBI, and the national security community?
What we're seeing right now is all of these communities are at war, and let's just show you who's on which side. On one side, we have the President of the United States, who actually authorized the release of this memo by Devin Nunes. And of course, we have Devin Nunes and Speaker of the House Paul Ryan, two of the most powerful people in Washington, and of course, Devin Nunes, the chairman of the House Intel Committee. On the other, those who strenuously objected to this memo's release, the head of the FBI, Christopher Wray, President Trump's own appointee, the Deputy Attorney General, Rod Rosenstein, and Dan Coats, Director of National Intelligence. And now, if I can just read to you a tweet that came out today from fired FBI Director James Comey. He spoke out about the release of this memo today. And what we have that he said is, "That's it. This honest and misleading memo wrecked the House Intel Committee, destroyed trust with intelligence community, damaged relationship with FISA court, and inexcusably exposed classified investigation of an American citizen. For what? DOJ and FBI must keep doing their job." So he clearly recognizes that there are deep problems and fissures within the intelligence community and law enforcement and the White House.
Is this normal?
Absolutely not. In fact, this is completely unprecedented, what we're seeing take place today, the release of classified information, not only classified information, but classified information into an ongoing investigation that's taking place. We've never seen anything like this. And make no mistake about it, there will be ramifications not only at home, but also abroad. Just think of all the other countries that the U.S. has information sharing agreements with. Though this release today will send chills through the spines of all those nations that share intelligence with the United States.
Okay, so let's do a deep dive into what this memo said. We saw the president this morning sitting in the White House, sitting in the Oval Office, and saying that he was deeply disappointed that there were people who should be shamed of what they had done, seeming to suggest that he was criticizing there the Department of Justice and the FBI. Now, this 4-page memo authored by Devin Nunes, or Devin Nunes' staff, I should say, basically relies heavily or critiques the FBI and their FISA surveillance warrant for relying on a dossier prepared by the former MI6 agent Christopher Steele. Let's go through what exactly Nunes' people are alleging is so bad about the Steele dossier in this instance.
Right, and actually to do that, we have to look at the FISA, and we also have to look at the FISA court. And so FISA, for our viewers, is the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, and of course there's the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court. So you actually have to go to this court, a secretive court, to actually get the release to actually wiretap individuals, American individuals, and so. What happened here is you had a number of senior officials who got surveillance on Carter Page, and so Carter Page is the catalyst for all of this. And if I can just name some of the individuals in this memo, in the third paragraph, it outlines then Director James Comey signed 3 FISA applications in question. Deputy Director Andrew McCabe signed 1. Then Deputy Attorney General Sally Yates, then Acting Deputy Attorney General Dana Bente, and Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein each signed 1 or more FISA applications. Now, what's interesting about all of the individuals I just named is all of them have either been fired, resigned, or left under pressure from the White House, with the exception of Rod Rosenstein. And today in the Oval Office, when the president was asked if he had confidence in Rod Rosenstein, there was a comment that he made, and he said, quote, "You figure that one out." So a very cryptic message from the president about Rod Rosenstein at this point.
If this is a vehicle to fire Christopher Wray at the FBI or Rod Rosenstein at Justice, both of them we should say are Trump appointees, or indeed Robert Mueller, what happens? Does this precipitate a constitutional crisis, and what does that mean?
Absolutely it does, at least based on what Democrats are saying. And actually, if you go back to last year when Robert Mueller was actually appointed to this position, there were many Republicans in the Congress who made it clear that that Robert Mueller was a red line for them in this investigation. Now, since the release of this memo, and based on many of the things that we've heard, even the reports last week, that the president wanted to fire Bob Mueller as early as last year, we haven't heard many Republicans actually come out and speak in support of Bob Mueller. In fact, we've only heard two, Senator Lindsey Graham from North Carolina and Senator Susan Collins from Maine. Those are the only two that we have heard actually speak to this. And also, if I can just go back to what the memo said, if you look at the very beginning of the memo, because also, too, I think this is very important. In the beginning, it states relating to the committee's ongoing investigation into the Department of Justice and Federal Bureau of Investigation. So it's clear that the House Intel Committee is investigating these two law enforcement agencies. And so, yes, I think right now it does appear that there are ingredients that suggest that we are on the precipice of a constitutional crisis.
This document acknowledged that there was already a counterintelligence investigation underway against another Trump operative, George Papadopoulos, who has pled guilty to lying about Russian contacts. Doesn't that diminish the alleged importance of the Steele dossier on which this complaint memo, if you will, is based?
And actually, you're absolutely right, Sheila, and that's why you see so many Democrats speaking out, and that's why you see the FBI having so many problems with this document, is because it was George Papadopoulos who actually triggered much of the investigation. In fact, if you look at Carter Page, who was mentioned prominently within the document, actually he's been under investigation since 2014, so for about 4 years now. But it was actually Papadopoulos, and if you remember, Papadopoulos has already pled guilty to lying to federal agents. So you're correct in your assessment here that that was actually the catalyst, not Carter Page, and certainly not the process in terms of how federal officials went about getting Pfizer surveillance taps for Carter Page or other officials.
Eric Ham, thanks so much, and a clearly developing story. We'll stay with it. Now to the action in a Michigan courtroom. The father of 3 victims of Larry Nassar could not restrain his anger and ended up being restrained himself. Watch what happened when Randall Margraves addressed Nassar right after his daughters detailed the horror inflicted by the doctor.
No, we don't want to swear. We don't want to have profanity. I can't imagine the anger and the anxiety and the feeling of wanting retribution. And if you need to say something to help you, I'm more than willing to let you say something. But in a courtroom, we don't use profanity. But if you have some words that you would like to say, I would like to give you the opportunity to say that.
I would ask you to, as part of this sentencing, to grant me 5 minutes in a locked room with this demon. Would you do that?
That is not how
yes or no?
No, sir, I can't.
Would you give me 1 minute?
You know that I can't do that. That's not how our legal system works.
I want that son of a bitch behind your back. I don't. Give me 1 minute with that pastor. Go ahead. You get
Bailiffs eventually calmed Margraves and led him from the courtroom. The father never laid a hand on Nasser. A few hours later, the father, who admitted being distraught, apologized to the judge. Arise News correspondent Akasa Amalupo has been following the Nasser story and is with us now. Is he going to be charged with anything for what happened in that courtroom today? It was a pretty extraordinary display.
Yes, very extraordinary. He will not be charged, and Judge Cunningham said there was no way she was going to use her contempt of court powers to punish him. But she did note and she understood the anguish the families were feeling.
And the Attorney General also spoke to those families in those moments when Mr. Margraves was being led out of the court. She turned and addressed the families.
She did, and she encouraged the families for civility. She encouraged them to use their words and not use their fists. She did go on to cite saying that this is letting him have power over us, and we cannot behave like this. She was encouraging parents to be an example for their children. But I can imagine it's very difficult.
Now, this is the third sentencing hearing that Larry Nasser has gone through. How long is it expected to last? And frankly, what's at stake for Nasser? We know he is going away for a very, very long time.
He is going away for the rest of his life. More than 30 victims have given statements so far, and the hearings will continue and stretch into next week. A total of 256 victims will have given testimony when this is over.
Thanks so much, Akasa.
Thank you.
Next, a big market sell-off plus your next order from Starbucks may come with a cancer warning. You're watching Arise America. A Wall Street sell-off tops today's business report. Arise News U.S. business editor Andrew Schmertz joins us. Bad day on Wall Street.
Yeah, Sheila, this was the biggest one-day drop since July of 2016, and that was Brexit. The Dow Jones Industrial Average losing 665 3/4. That's off by about 2.5%. The broader markets lost about 2%. You know, the markets started sliding right from the start of the day, and really interest rates played a role there. The yield on the 10-year Treasury bond rose to a highest level in 4 years. Once again, concern about inflation kicking in, and then it accelerated when the GOP memo came out. So the market was down.
Machinations in Washington really played a role.
Yeah, I think there's three things that went on with the markets today. Earnings a little soft for a couple big companies, including ExxonMobil. Then, of course, the interest rates going up and that fear of inflation. And remember, the bond market competes against the equity market. If the bond market is paying better interest, money moves from stocks and into bonds. And then the third leg of this was the political uncertainty of everything going on. That rattled the markets. They don't like political uncertainty.
It should have been a good day in theory. The January unemployment numbers were in. They were pretty good, but there was one number that in particular was a bit of a surprise.
So the unemployment numbers cut both ways first. So they also had higher wages in there. And wages going up, of course, is another sign of inflation. So the markets didn't like that. So we'll start with the broader unemployment number. The U.S. economy created 200,000 jobs, about 20,000 better than expected. The rate stayed at 4.1%. Wages grew at 2.9%. That's the best since 2009. So we're starting to see real wage inflation up. However, African-American unemployment went the wrong direction. That was up to 7.7% from 6.8%. A number of factors may have gone in there. Economists say the demographic statistics of these are a little bit more volatile than the broader one. Also, more African-Americans may have looked for jobs and therefore put themselves back into the job market, and those start to register as being unemployed. So we'll need a few more reports to really see which direction that number is going in.
There's a new development in large measure because of the Me Too movement, the push for more female leadership. How is that happening?
So in London, there's a group called the 30 Club wanting to push for 30% women representation among the leadership of publicly traded companies. Now, this is happening in London, but many U.S. firms are behind it. J.P. Morgan Chase and BlackRock. These are companies that control $13 trillion of investments altogether. And they're telling publicly traded companies, you better start doing something about the inequality in your boardrooms, in the C-suite, or we're going to start voting our shares negatively against your management.
Now, Amazon has developed a new gadget. Basically, you can't hide. If you're working for them, you can't hide.
So if you work in a warehouse for Amazon, they're giving you wristbands. Now, these wristbands aren't meant to track you specifically. They're meant to track the packages you're carrying. And if you put them in the wrong bins, they vibrate and they tell you to move it to another bin. However, they have the same effect of tracking you. And a lot of workers don't like that. They say, there's some critics who are saying it's causing anxiety. And Amazon, interestingly, has patented this technology now. So it's probable that it's going to show up in other warehouses.
And a cup of Joe in California may come with a cancer warning? What's that?
Yeah, so back in 2010, a group called the Council for Education and Research sued 7-Eleven, Starbucks, and other coffee shops. They say California law requires that if any ingredients in coffee are carcinogens, you have to tell your customers about it. And coffee has one ingredient in it which has been linked to cancer. So they sued back in 2010 and said, you got to put these labels on. It's been bouncing around the courts. And next week, the companies go to mediation, hoping to probably head off the worst of that.
And just because it's Super Bowl weekend, if I'm an investor, is there a team that I should be rooting for?
So I'm a New York Giants fan, so I'm going to hide under my covers when the Patriots and the Eagles play each other. But it would be the Philadelphia Eagles. Historically, when the NFC team wins over the last 51 years, 50 Super Bowls, 8 out of 10 times the stock market has gone up. But it's been wrong the last 2 years. So you may think it's all random, but those are pretty good odds there.
Okay, thanks so much, Andrew. Thank you. A 37-year-old real-life Hollywood mystery story is being reopened. Actress Natalie Wood's 1981 drowning is now classified as a suspicious death by the Los Angeles Sheriff's Department. Her then husband, actor Robert Wagner, is now considered a person of interest in her death. For nearly 4 decades, speculation has swirled around the death of the Oscar-nominated actor, and now new witnesses have emerged. Investigators say the witnesses gave statements that portray a new sequence of events on the night that Wood drowned while on a yacht with Wagner off Catalina Island. Despite the new evidence, officials say there is not enough to arrest the now 87-year-old actor. Up next, on the eve of the Super Bowl, what NFL players taking a knee has to do with the feeling that Trump is not my president. You're watching Arise America. According to Gallup, President Trump's job disapproval rating is at 58% today. That gives credence to the topic of a new book, Not Our President, New Directions from the Pushed Out, the Others, and the Clear Majority in Trump's Stolen America. Carl Dix, co-founder of Refuse Fascism, is one of the contributors to the collection of essays in the book. Welcome, Carl. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you for having me on.
Your contribution is titled The Truth About Trump's Fascist Program, What It Means for Black People, and What Must Be Done About It. What do you see happening, and what do you think has to be done?
Well, what I see happening, and I lay it out in my essay in the book, is a regime that is moving in a determined way to install fascist rule here in America. And when I use that term, a lot of people say you're going too far, that can't happen in America, and they miss 2 things. First of all, they're missing the history of this country, because this is a country that was born in genocide against the native inhabitants, enslavement and terror against enslaved African people. Even when slavery was ended, it was slavery by another name, Jim Crow segregation, lynch mob terror. A country that has done all of that can and has done unspeakable horrors against people, and that is going on now. When you look at people being picked up, going to the court, a woman was going to the court to get a order of protection against an abusive spouse. She was picked up by ICE, detained, ripped from her family, and then you multiply this by the thousands for what's going on. And even Trump's compromise that he's offering the Democrats on immigration, it's like a white supremacist hostage note. I will kidnap these DACA kids, and if you want them to get their protections back, give me $25 billion for the wall, cut way down on family reunification, immigration and other legal forms of immigration. It is all part of Make America White Again and Make America Fascist. And then the other thing that people are missing is that a lot of what Trump is doing could have been taken from Hitler's playbook.
You know, we talked about the Gallup poll ratings before we started our conversation, where he is at 58% disapproval, which means that the majority of Americans don't approve of what this president is doing. Do you have confidence in your fellow citizens?
Well, that's not enough. People can express their disapproval, but they have to go beyond that to act, to drive this regime from office through massive nonviolent protest. And I say that because Hitler in Nazi Germany never had a majority of the Germans behind him. He won an election with like 40-some% of the vote, moved on, and made himself the Führer, the emperor of the land. Trump wins a minority election, doesn't get the majority behind him, but he continues to steamroller ahead. They're putting Christian fascist judges on all levels of the court. We can reach a point where they won't even necessarily have to formally take away all your rights, because they will have stacked a court that won't uphold them. People have to actually look at what's going on, look at what's happening to immigrants, look at what's happening to lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender people, see the horrors, and resolve that it's up to them to stop it.
You call for nonviolent protests. Why not call for more political action, for more people to become involved in the political process, for more people to run, for more people to raise money, for more people to organize?
Okay, well, first off, I don't define politics by elections. Politics is about power and actually taking to the streets, demanding change, and refusing to accept less than that change is a part of the political process. Because let's look at civil rights. Civil rights got passed in Congress, but only after African Americans and other people stood up and said, Jim Crow segregation, we refuse to accept that anymore. People have to actually understand what changes things. The changes don't come from the top. I mean, right now the Democrats are saying impeachment is off the table. In other words, we'll go to the next election with this guy, and going with this guy to the next election is what Germans tried in Nazi Germany. And look at what it got them. We cannot repeat that.
I want to change the conversation a little bit and talk about Colin Kaepernick. This is Super Bowl weekend. What impact do you think the protest that he led has had in, first off, public consciousness, and then second, on the NFL as an institution?
Well, in terms of the public consciousness, a wave of taking a knee happened. High school sports teams, cheerleaders, colleges, all across the country. I was at many actions with parents of people who had been abused by the police, and you saw people who were in walkers, on crutches, who took a knee. Colin spearheaded that, and he is loved by many people for it. He's also hated by a lot of people because that rest of the country that is still with Trump was rallied to hate him. So, but he actually helped to polarize society around a very important issue, that issue being police terror directed especially at black and brown people. Now, as far as how it's impacted the NFL has tried to throw him out of the league and get past his protest. They haven't quite succeeded yet, but that's what they're trying to do, and people actually need to take that up. I mean, people have had demonstrations outside of sports arenas. There's going to be a demonstration outside of the Super Bowl this Sunday by people who are going to get as close as they can and take a knee. And I went to the last NFL owners meeting that was in New York City. I actually got into the hotel where they were having it and confronted Jerry Jones, and I said to him, I had a picture of the things they used to put on enslaved Africans back in the days of slavery, and I was saying, is this what you want NFL players to be wearing today? Because he was saying he's going to fire anybody on his team that took a knee. So the NFL is an institution at the top. They're trying to avoid any impact, and that's why they banned him from the league. And anybody who wants to argue that he's not as good as any of the 60-some quarterbacks in the league, I'll tell them, first of all, they're either a liar or they don't know football, because his touchdown to interception ratio, not as good as Brady's, who had the best, but it's almost as good as Brady's. Tell me that that guy doesn't belong in the league.
Carl Dix, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me on.
Up next, President Trump has disparaged African nations, but the president of one country says he loves Trump. You're watching Arise America. President Trump used his State of the Union address to spearhead a law in Congress aimed at ensuring foreign aid only goes to friends of America. The law takes a dig at U.S. aid recipients who voted to rebuke his decision to recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. But one world leader, Yoweri Museveni, the president of Uganda, says he loves Donald Trump for telling Africans like it is. But in the book, Another Fine Mess, America, Uganda, and the War on Terror, our guest Helen Epstein argues Museveni loves America for fueling his corrupt government for decades. With us now, we have Helen Epstein, the author of that book. Epstein is a biochemist who lived and worked in Uganda, where she helped develop a vaccine to fight AIDS. She's also a professor at Bard College. And Lawrence Chiwanugwak Nsereko is a Ugandan journalist. He teaches at Dutchess County Community College. Welcome to you both. Thank you for joining us. Thanks. Helen, if I can begin with you, how much Western money goes into Uganda on an annual basis?
Well, we really don't know. We know it's hundreds of millions, probably about $1 billion a year if you combine all sources, including the World Bank, the U.S. government, and also European governments as well, and other agencies.
Have you, Lawrence, if I can ask you, what have you seen over the course of the last decades in Uganda? With that amount of aid, one would think that there would be a lot of development, there would be a lot of progress. Is that what you're seeing in Uganda?
No, you don't see that. You don't get to see that on the ground. On the paper, the money comes, but it ends up in the high echelons of those in power, and they amass it as they wish.
So basically we're talking about corruption. In what ways is that money spent that doesn't directly benefit the people, Helen?
Well, we see hundreds of millions of dollars intended for road projects, for HIV/AIDS projects, for malaria projects, for children's vaccines, have ended up really in the coffers of politicians linked to the ruling party, who use the money to entrench their grip on power. We suspect, we don't know, but we suspect a lot of it ends up going into the security forces also for the forces of repression.
Your book makes the argument that there basically has been a multi-American administration compact with Museveni that over the years has, as you both said, has funded him, but has also basically done, to a certain extent, America's bidding across the African continent. In what ways have you seen that?
Well, it seems as though very early on, it seemed that Museveni was very close to the Reagan administration, beginning in the late 1980s, when the United States began to worry about Islamic terrorism, particularly in Sudan, which is Uganda's neighbor. Which was then, especially in the early 90s, beginning to play host to Islamic Jihad groups and Osama bin Laden, for example, who were interested in toppling Mubarak in Egypt and undoing the peace deal with Israel that we wanted very much to preserve. And so the United States, at a certain point in the early 1990s, began funneling weapons through Uganda to Southern Sudanese rebels to fight the Sudan government and weaken it. And at the same time, many of these weapons were coming from the United States, and they were also diverted, some of them, to rebels who invaded Rwanda and began the civil war there that culminated in the genocide 3 years later. The weapons also later appear to have gone into Congo to destabilize that country. And so I think many people are aware that Central Africa, the Great Lakes region and the Horn, was a real mess in the 90s and continues to be. But few people really know Museveni's kind of role in orchestrating quite a bit of that chaos and America's support for him.
Lawrence, can I ask, what is the impact of all of this on the people of Uganda? Obviously, there is a refugee crisis in the region where there are many displaced from South Sudan who have come into Uganda. What is the impact of all of that on the people of Uganda?
Well, the impact of that is that there is a situation right now which is going to be about resources. One of the main issues being land, that Museveni on the international community is playing a good host, quote and unquote.
Uganda's won international praise for its reception
for
and treatment
its reception
of refugees.
Yeah, but if you look at that reception, the people are actually, they've been welcoming from as far as I can remember growing up. We grew up with the people from Rwanda, people who had come from places that had conflicts. But today, there is almost a systematic way that people are coming into the country and are being settled. And you have to really study Museveni and figure out his role in these wars, and then the refugees run away, come into Uganda, and he receives foreign dollars, and it's his companies, for instance, his Minister of Foreign Affairs runs the company that does all the handling at the single international airport. So all the refugee food that is shipped in by the World Food Program, name it, they are making money off this. And it's really sad that the UN is being taken for a ride.
Helen, we remember the bloody dictatorship of Idi Amin, which was a horrible period in Ugandan history. You have said that, in your view, Museveni is even worse than Idi Amin.
Yeah. At the outside, there have been estimates that Idi Amin killed 300,000 people. I've never seen an accurate accounting of that, but certainly tens of thousands, perhaps hundreds of thousands of people died under his reign. But he ruled only for 8 years. Museveni's been there for 32 years. If you include all the mayhem that he's been involved with in the region, if we count sort of the war in northern Uganda, for example, untold thousands upon thousands of people died there. If we consider Rwanda, nearly 1 million people died there. Congo, millions more. Then really the death toll begins to add up, and Idi Amin begins to look good by comparison.
Thank you very much to Lawrence and Helen. Thank you for joining us. Next, the latest numbers on the flu paint a grim picture. You're watching Arise America. The flu season in the U.S. keeps getting worse. The Centers for Disease Control reported today that 16 more children have died, bringing the total number of pediatric flu deaths to 53 since the season began in October. The health agency is warning the peak is still to come. Dr. Nsereko Okeke-Igbokwe is back with us. Dr. Nsereko, why are children so vulnerable to this?
Children are so vulnerable to the flu, mainly because they're still trying to build up their immune systems. So when you look at the populations of people that are really affected by the flu, it's usually going to be children who are younger than 5 years old, and it's going to be adults greater than 65, pregnant women, and those with chronic medical conditions such as diabetes or any respiratory issues such as asthma.
So when we think of the flu, we think of there's a fever, there's chills, there's coughing. What is it that's actually killing these patients?
Most of the time, patients who are dying of the flu, they die more so of the complications of the flu, some of which include dehydration. We see that a lot in the pediatric population when they do get sick with the flu. They're losing a lot of fluids because maybe they're vomiting or having a lot of diarrhea with the flu. They also typically die of secondary infections. Most of the time it's from a secondary pneumonia. The immune system becomes so compromised when they do have the flu that they are more likely to get these secondary infections that can compromise the lungs and someone's breathing ability. And a third way people usually die of the flu is something that we call sepsis, a very severe infection which can typically cause organ failure and subsequently death.
So if you're a parent or you've got an older parent, when do you know you need to go not just to the doctor, but you need to go to the hospital?
There are a few red flags everyone needs to be aware of. The first one is a very persistent fever that just doesn't seem to go away.
And can't be touched by the usual remedies.
Exactly. The second thing that would make one need to go see a doctor quickly would be if you have symptoms that seem to dissipate and all of a sudden you think you're getting better, then it just comes back with more of a vengeance. When that happens, we usually think that's when you are having that secondary infection that can lead to those deadly complications. And of course, another telltale sign, if you are having difficulty breathing, you need to go see a doctor immediately. That's an emergency.
We've heard in some cases people have gone to hospitals and they've been told, oh, you're fine, or you just take this, take this medication, you'll be fine. And then they end up taking a turn for the worse and they very rapidly fail. How is it that even in a hospital setting, sometimes doctors and clinicians are unable to spot the signs of somebody who's really going to be in trouble?
So the way that the flu works, sometimes patients can be asymptomatic, meaning that they're not even showing symptoms even though they've been infected for a 24 to 48-hour period. So perhaps when they've gone in, the symptoms really have yet to manifest to give one the sign or signal that, hey, there's something really wrong and this person needs to actually get treatment for the flu.
So the CDC says we're not yet at peak for the flu season. What can people do? Is it too late to go get a vaccine?
It's definitely not too late to get the vaccine. If you haven't gotten the vaccine yet, you should get it today. We are at week 11 of flu season, and typically it's anywhere between 10 to 20 weeks that it lasts till. So it could still go on for a couple of more weeks. The benefit of getting the flu, even at this later point in the flu season, is that it protects you. If you do actually get the flu, your symptoms will be less than somebody else who did not get the flu vaccination. If you do get the flu vaccination, you're less likely to be hospitalized due to your symptoms, and you're less likely to have any more complications. So there is some benefit in getting the flu vaccination, even though the efficacy this year is not so great.
So if you've got the flu, basic things that you should do: go to work, go to school?
If you have the flu, stay at home. That's protecting other people, and it's also going to protect you from getting even worse from others who may have it as well that you may see out in the open in school settings or the work environment. Another thing that you need to do is make sure you stay hydrated. Many of the time, much of the time when people do have the flu, they tend to lose a lot of their body fluids, and that can really make them have to go to the hospital and require IV fluids and other things to give them the support that they need.
Great, Dr. Nsereko, thanks so much. So basic rules: stay home and hydrate, and don't forget that vaccine.
Exactly. Also wash your hands. That's another key thing.
Great, thanks so much. Thank you. Next, a preview of the Super Bowl and a lesson on the dating game from a proud bird. You're watching Arise America. You undoubtedly know that the Super Bowl is Sunday. Vegas odd makers have made the New England Patriots a 5-point favorite over the Philadelphia Eagles. Here with more on the big game is Brandon Robinson. He's the managing editor of Respect magazine and host of the Scoop B radio podcast. Okay, let's get to it. Who's going to win?
Right on the spot. I have an upset. I have the Philadelphia Eagles. Obviously, Vegas has a 5.5-point favorite. But it's the Super Bowl. The Philadelphia Eagles finished 13-3. They managed to actually make it to the big game with their quarterback, Carson Wentz, out, and They were able to do it with Foles. So I really legitimately have the Philadelphia Eagles making it. But it's not just the offense, the defense. Their secondary of Malcolm Jenkins and Rodney McLeod and other folks. They've really stepped up. And it's not going to be an easy game. But honestly, it's the two best teams in the NFL. The AFC with the New England Patriots, who they did their thing in the playoffs, and then the Philadelphia Eagles. So it's going to be an exciting one.
How's the weather going to impact this?
Cold. I reported snow in Minnesota earlier today, and a lot of my buddies are out there covering it now in Radio Row, and it's been horrendous. It's been treacherous, but it's Minnesota. What do you expect?
Yeah, exactly. It's February in Minnesota.
Minnesota. It's cold, but this is what you sign up for in the Midwest.
Okay, so the Eagles and Patriots have history. We've been there before.
Sure, 2004.
And what does that tell you about this game, if anything?
I mean, it's significant. Tom Brady's been in the NFL for 18 years,
right.
40 years old, and an active quarterback at 40 years old. But, you know, years ago, when they played in 2004, it was a different quarterback. Tom Brady was the starting quarterback in the NFL then against a Donovan McNabb-led quarterback team along with Terrell Owens. They weren't able to seal the deal, but it's a new football team for the Philadelphia Eagles and a new coach as well. Andy Reid was the head coach of the Eagles at the time. But the Eagles have definitely rebranded themselves. They fired their coach that they had 2 years ago. Got rid of a lot of wide receivers, Macklin, Deshaun Jackson, and some of those other guys. Chip Kelly was the head coach before they come in with a new playbook, a new attitude, and I think Philadelphia legitimately has a chance. Philadelphia, I think the thing that makes them stand out the most is, aside from the fact that it's chowder versus Philly cheesesteak, is the fact that they're underdogs. They've been walking around in Philadelphia with these dogs on their head and kind of literally dogs.
And tell me about the fans. How do the fans stack up? I mean, Beantown versus Philly.
I was actually in Philadelphia 2 days ago.
Yeah.
What you'll find interesting is as I was heading home, I actually saw a Boston Market restaurant. They crossed out the X on Boston Market, and it says Philly Market. Philadelphia fans, I lived in the area for 5 years. They're very serious about their team. They ride or die with them no matter what, even when they were doing bad. One thing that's interesting about Philadelphia right now, the Philadelphia 76ers basketball team, they've been going with this mantra, trust the process. And with the Eagles, it's kind of carried over as well. Philadelphia, they're always ramped up for their teams, but I think for the fans, it's going to be a treat either way. Whether they win or lose, they'll be happy, but I see a win coming their way.
So my notes say that tight end Rob Gronkowski had a concussion
2 weeks
recently.
ago, yes.
So, and he plays for the Patriots.
Tight end for the New England Patriots.
And so, can he play?
He can play. He's probable for Sunday's game. He is the heart and soul of that offensive core. You have the wide receiver. They have a huge offensive threat. Obviously, Tom Brady being the key to the engine, but that starts it going. But Danny Amendola is another guy that's been very helpful. He actually helped the New England Patriots rally from being 10 down in the fourth quarter against the Jaguars in the AFC Championship game. Without Gronkowski, it would be tough. He's probable to play, but they won a Super Bowl with Gronk last year. Without Gronk last year when they played the Atlanta Falcons in the Super Bowl. So it'll be an easy addition for them if he plays, but all points indicate that he will play for the New England Patriots. And
if Brady, assuming Brady plays, assuming, let's just say, the Patriots win, what does that mean for Brady in his career?
Well, a lot of offensive coordinators, a lot of defensive coordinators are up for potential jobs moving forward. There are people who think that this is the last hurrah for the New England Patriots, their dynasty. They've been relevant in the early 2000s all the way to the 2010s. If Brady doesn't play, I would imagine that, or if he doesn't continue with the Patriots, I'd imagine there'll be other teams interested in the future. But you never can count out Belichick, who's the head coach. You can never count out Tom Brady. That team's been doing it for years. I talked to Jarvis Green, a former member of the New England Patriots, on my podcast, Scoopy Radio, and he just talked about the Belichick way. He talked about just how oiled this machine is and how disciplined they are. I don't think these guys are overestimating or underestimating the Eagles.
I got a minute left. I have to ask you about Justin Timberlake, the halftime show. Last time he performed, 2004, Janet Jackson, and we all know about that the nip slip,
yes.
The wardrobe failure. Yes. Can we anticipate a safer performance?
Oh, for sure. This is kid-friendly, and I don't think Janet will be there, but I think at the same time he is having other guests. Bruno Mars may come in, Jay-Z may come in, and a lot of guys, the hangover from the Grammys. There'll be a lot of guys you saw in the Grammys last week being in the Super Bowl and the halftime show this coming Sunday.
Thanks so much, Brandon.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Finally, from the Super Bowl to singles dating games, and the story of Nigel, a very handsome gannet bird. Nigel was lured to a desolate island off the coast of New Zealand by wildlife officials who placed concrete gannet decoys 5 years ago. Nigel became enamored with one of the faux birds, building her, or it, a nest and grooming her concrete feathers year after year, getting no love in return. He even ignored 3 other gannets who finally landed on the island last month. Sadly, Nigel died this week next to his concrete mate in that unrequited love nest. Wherever Nigel's soul has landed, the single scene surely could not be worse. And that's it for Arise America. Thanks for joining us.